Welcome to the BMJ podcast. I'm Duncan Jarvis, multimedia editor for the BMJ, and I'm standing in for Cameron Abassi whilst he takes a summer break, but we've still got some really great stories from the world of medicine to share with you. Firstly this month, we'll hear about the Galleri Test. It's been hailed as an answer to the UK's poorer cancer outcomes because the hope is it can detect 50 cancers in a single test at an early stage. But an investigation, just published on bmj.com, raises questions about how effective it might be.
Because what people keep forgetting is that the UK NSC and the NICE, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, they were set up because we were really bad at doing things before. They were set up to solve problems. So if we override them, we're going to just create the same situation for all the problems that we used to have.
And then the total waiting list in the English NHS has risen to over 7.5 million. And the need to tackle that has become more urgent. Guy's and St Thomas's Trust in London has been using HIT Lists to tackle the backlog, and we'll hear how that works.
But as time has gone on, we've evolved into doing more high complex, low volume cases. So we've moved to arthroplasties, plastics reconstructions, cochlear implants, robotic cases. So much more complicated cases.
But first, that new investigation just published on bmj.com. It tries to get behind the decision-making which has led to this multi-cancer screening test, the Galleri Test, being entered into a clinical trial in the NHS, which could then see it rolled out across England with millions of tests ordered. I'm joined by the two authors of that investigation, Margaret McCartney and Deborah Cohen. Margaret, can I get you to introduce yourself?
So I'm a general practitioner in Glasgow and freelance writer and broadcaster and a senior lecturer in the Department of Medicine at the University of St Andrews.
And Deb.
I'm Deb Cohen. I'm an investigative journalist, writer and broadcaster that's been working in the health space. I'm former editor of the BMJ that's been working in health journalism for quite a long time.
We know both of you well at the BMJ, and you seem like the two people that we would go to speak about this Galleri Test and what's going on. But first of all, I think for our listeners, we should actually explain what is this Galleri Test and how does it pick up 50 cancers, potentially?
Yes, so this is a test that's manufactured by a company called Grail, who come from the west coast of America. And there's been lots of excitement in the UK over this over the last few years. There's been lots of press announcements made that this is going to give us an early detection tool that will get the UK over the line with all its various early diagnosis of cancer policies that it's been made. And you can see why it's attracted to policymakers. You know, we have these very expensive screening programs for one disease, so cervical screening or aortic aneurysm screening or bowel screening, one cancer at a time. And of course, the politicians are very seduced by this idea of being able to test for, I quote, 50 cancers at a time. The idea that a blood draw, one single blood test, might be able to give you an early diagnosis and detection in lots and lots of different areas. That would be pretty impressive were that the case. And of course, the truth is always a bit different from what the theory might be. So the UK decided to launch a trial of this multi-cancer detection test in the UK a few years ago. And we've been basically looking into how this originated, who decided how it was going to be run, what the criteria were to decide whether or not this was going to be a good idea, because we've had some news about some preliminary results of a trial that were meant to be the signal for whether or not the UK could take on 1 million tests of this being done a year, and really asking some questions about the politics of this and the way that we try and make evidence-based health policy decisions in the UK.
Deb, what you did was go away and do a lot of FOIing and trying to find out what was going on. Tell us a little bit about the process of this investigation.
Well, I think FOIs are rapidly becoming a bit of a mugs game. It's like a merry dance to get information that you need. So it was quite painstaking, I think it's fair to say, lots of rejections and narrow down the request. But ultimately, we wanted to know more about the decision-making processes, which were the ministers involved, how they came to decide whether to roll out Grail or this particular Galleri test, because there are other multi-cancer detection tests available. So what processes went in to selecting that? We found out that NHS England didn't put it out for tender, which is, you'd expect that is quite unusual. And so we looked to see what meetings there had been with representatives of Grail and who'd been around the table. And I think one of the things jumped out is David Cameron. David Cameron was a paid advisor to Illumina, who had merged with Grail, had meetings with the likes of Nadeem Zahawi, and we might remember him from the pandemic as the vaccine minister. And when what they were able to do was discuss, Grail was very much on the table. So it was that kind of lobbying, although David Cameron has been cleared from unregistered lobbying, but there were certainly meetings between him and those ministers involved.
So you've got this excitement happening at a Department of Health level, and this agreement that this trial will be run, and then the results of that might inform the purchase of 1 million of these tests. That trial's obviously pivotal here. Do you have some information about that as well?
Well, first of all, yeah, I mean, basically the trial date was before the publication of the information about the trial, and there was lots of things that were missing from what you would normally get in a description of a trial. And when I FOI'd them, I was told that they couldn't be made available to me because of commercial confidentiality. And yeah, we get that. But when there's a big trial going on with lots of members of the public being told that this might be the answer to cancer early detection, I think it's good for those details to be able to be scrutinised by people within the field, not just the people that are being participants in the trial, but also other healthcare researchers. But really importantly, you would want our NHS organisations to have sight of this, like, for example, the UK National Screening Committee or the NIHR, for example. You would want to feel as though the people who are experts, and I think the people that be involved in running the trial are extremely able and capable and very good scientists. It's no reflection on them. It's more a reflection on how these trials started off in the first place, where it actually came from. And was this something that had oversight from one of the bodies within the NHS that would normally be doing these kind of things to look at new technologies? Or was this something instigated by the company itself?
And actually, part of the investigation we found was the National Screening Committee had actually raised concerns. So Mike Richards, who was the chair of the National Screening Committee, raised concerns to Amanda Pritchard, who is chief exec of the NHS, about whether the science was cooked enough to even take it to that stage.
There was a study done in America looking to see how effective was this test actually picking up cancer in people already known to have cancer. So this was, people who'd had a diagnosis, who had, a known cancer disease, and the test picked up their cancer less than half the time. So you can see just straight away, this is not a high yield. So I think there would be questions asked about why you would start off like this, because when you're doing a screening test in the population, you're really trying to make sure that it is pretty accurate. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it if you're missing most of the cases?
And, that's the kind of thing that the National Screening Committee is really concerned about and cares about. So no wonder they raised that issue. And Margaret, what do you think this says about the use of the National Screening Committee?
So I've made no secret of my love for the UK National Screening Committee, because it is the line that must be held, because it is so tempting to think that finding stuff early sounds logical, it sounds really sensible. Why would we not want to do that? And the reason why the UK National Screening Committee is so important is because it stands up for evidence. It should be saying all these kind of opportunities come into the UK to say we can screen early, we can diagnose early, we can do X, Y, Z. the UK NSC should be in there saying we need randomised controlled trials, we need hard endpoints that we know that we're actually benefiting people rather than just, making the numbers look good. We need to make sure things are cost effective. And then if you do have a screening programme, it needs to be properly costed, it needs to be audited, etc., etc. And this is all really good stuff. And it's stuff that it's crucial, because you can imagine if you're an MP, you must get people coming to you all the time to say, why are you not doing cervical screening early, for example? Why are you waiting to age 25? Why are you not doing aortic aneurysm screening for men in their 40s, etc., etc.? And you need the UK NSC to say, okay, this decision has been made simply on science. It's simply about what works and what doesn't work. It's not to do with, how much money we're willing to put into, elderly adults as opposed to young children. It's simply to do is, do we have a test that's good enough and that's cost effective in practice? So it is a good thing to have that. And I think it needs to be cherished. And what I really worry is that over the last few years, we've seen it being undermined and run around by various other organisations. Another example would be the push over the last few years to screen for atrial fibrillation. All while the UK National Screening Committee has said, do not do population-based screening for atrial fibrillation because we do not know whether it works or not. And there's a big trial going on just now in England to try and work that out. In the meantime, this screening has been happening because it's been funded mainly by tech and pharmaceutical companies who stood to benefit if more AF screening was happening. Now, I think that's pretty shocking, to be honest with you, but it has been happening, and it's been happening in plain sight. And the UK NSC have not been able to kind of overreach that and say, look, you need to stop doing that because we don't recommend it and it could well be harmful.
I mean, there is another political element, as Margaret said, to like having the likes of NICE or the NSC. It gives the ministers air cover. So if the decision that's been made that certain lobby groups or in special interest groups don't like, they can go, well, it wasn't me, Gov. We defer it to our kind of arm's length independent bodies. So it's as much a matter for as political expediency as it is for kind of evidence-based practice. Wes Streeting said he wants to use the NHS to help boost the economy and work closely with device manufacturers and tech and the pharmaceutical industry. What this says as a lesson is use the machinery that's there to protect you. Make sure you involve those people and those committees that have been around forever and a day to check what you're doing and make sure your decision making is well thought through.
Yeah, broad agree with Deborah. Wes Streeting has got a chance to do things differently. So it would be great to make the system work as it's meant to work. Because what people keep forgetting is that the UK NSC and the NICE, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, they were set up because we were really bad at doing things before. They were set up to solve problems. So if we override them, we're going to just create the same situation for all the problems that we used to have just happening back again. And I get this idea about growing the economy. I'm not an economist, but I can appreciate it. But you can't grow the economy if you're subjecting loads of people to really badly performing tests when you're not using adequately evidenced medicine. The way to make the healthcare economy better is to do less stuff better, I think. And that means really subjecting stuff to a high degree of critical analysis. And these decisions are difficult when it comes down to what you use and what you don't use. That's why we've got systems in place to try and sort that out. And it would be absolutely fantastic if we had a return back to basics, get all our foundations right, and then everything else will fall into place.
And that investigation, which has a lot more detail and really delves into the decision-making around the Galleri test, as shown by the FOIs that Deborah and Margaret have done, is now live and free to access on bmj.com. The promise of detecting cancer will be for nothing if we can't get referral times down and surgical waiting lists under control. This week it was announced that at the end of June in England, an estimated 6.39 million patients, that's around 11% of the population, are awaiting 7.62 million treatments. Getting those lists down will take a lot of effort across the whole NHS. And one trust has started by creating HIT Lists. And to explain what they are, I am joined by Imran Ahmed. Imran, could I get you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Duncan. Well, thanks for inviting me. My name's Dr. Imran Ahmed. I'm a consultant anaesthetist at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Trust in London, UK. And I'm also the Deputy Clinical Director of Anaesthesia, Theatres and Perioperative Medicine.
Great, thanks for joining us. And also we have the BMJ's Gareth Iacobucci. Gareth, could you just introduce yourself quickly?
Hi Duncan, and hi everybody. Yes, I'm one of the journalists at the BMJ based in the UK, and recently produced an article focusing very much on the hit list model that Imran and his team have spearheaded at Guy's and St Thomas's.
Well, I think first things first, let's hear about that model. Imran, what is it that you and your team have designed here?
HIT list stands for high intensity theatre lists, and what we've done is we've used a model where we've tried to maximise our operative time in theatre and minimise our non-operative time where surgeon is not operating. And by maximising the operative time, we've found that we can do many more cases in the same time frame. Often on a list, maybe 40 or 50% of the time, especially in high turnaround lists, the surgeon is not operating. You're waiting, you're doing things in between cases, you're consenting patients, you're waiting for the patient to be anaesthetised or to go to recovery and for the next patient to come to theatre. Whereas what we do is we use an overlapping model, almost parallel processing. We use 2 theatres with multiple staff, and that way we can time and plan the list so that there is minimum downtime, minimum non-operative time, and maximum operative time. So we increase the operative time from a conventional 50-60% of the list to over 90%. And that way we can get many more cases done in the same time frame. And that's the model that we've been using. It's nothing new, but we've refined it, we've modified it. We spend a lot of time planning the lists to make sure that we can run it well on the day of the surgery. And that's our sort of hit list concept and hit list model that we use.
And Gareth, you've, as you say, you've written about this, and it seems like the government is planning to pick up what Imran and his team has done and roll it out across more of the NHS in England.
Yes, that's right. So I think it was in his first press conference after the election, Keir Starmer pinpointed NHS waiting times and tackling the treatment backlog as one of his major priorities. This had already been kind of trailed in their manifesto, and as he was sort of setting out more details about how he would do it, he referenced the scheme, the hit list scheme, as a very effective way of increasing the volume essentially of surgical activity, and he signalled that he wanted more trusts to adopt this model to try and bring down that huge waiting list, which I think stands at around sort of just over 7.5 million still at the moment. So the government clearly sees this as something that could be potentially scaled up and used elsewhere.
And writing about this has led to some questions, I think, about how this could be scaled and rolled out and the impact on staff. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, there are obviously lots of things that need to be in place, and I think Imran could talk more about this, that for it to be effective. I mean, certainly one of the sort of first questions I had was, what were the main challenges that your team faced in implementing this, and what are the lessons, I guess, for other trusts who might be interested in exploring this?
The first thing to say is hit lists aren't for every hospital, aren't for every surgeon, aren't for every trust. You need to have a specific setup. You need to have a specific case mix, and you need buy-in by everybody. So everybody involved in that list has to have a buy-in. If you have a surgeon who's been forced to do this, or an anaesthetist who doesn't really want to be there, or nurses who don't want to do this, then it won't work. So the challenges were to, first of all, change that culture of, yes, we're going to be using 2 theatres and doing triple the number of cases that you would normally do. The planning process, often it's done in silos. You will see individuals along the patient pathway, whereas what we do is we have everybody who's involved in that pathway get involved in the hit list in the whole pathway. So everybody's involved in regular meetings to plan the hit list, and by planning meticulously, you then deliver it very well on the day of the hit list. So overcoming those changes, getting engagement, getting involvement, finding the right people was the initial challenge. But then once we started doing this, it's almost self-selective. the right people then come to you and say, we want to do a hit list because we think is right for us. We have the right case mix, we have the right surgeons, we have a long waiting list. Can we do a hit list? And we've done this across multiple sites. So GSTT is a huge trust with 2 big sites, but multiple operating theatres, which almost run independently. And so we've run hit lists in 5 different sites within our trust, which is like running it in 5 different hospitals. And what I've learned is that if I can run it in 5 different sites within GSTT, this can be run in other sites as long as it's an appropriate infrastructure to run these lists.
I was just interested in how you sort of were able to engage staff, to get that buy-in. Did it require sort of lots of conversations? Did it require incentives? I'm just interested in sort of how that, how that was born and then kind of developed, I guess.
Yeah, no, great question, because I think I'm in a slightly fortunate position that I'm a deputy clinical director, but I'm also, as I say, I'm a jobbing anaesthetist. I've been working in this trust for nearly 15 years. I know the staff, I know the theatres, I know the surgeons, and so I was able to have those conversations to engage people. So I spoke to our head of nursing and said, look, this is what we'd like to do. I spoke to the matrons, I spoke to the service manager, I spoke to my clinical director, and basically everybody could see the potential in this. And so I got the buy-in from those senior people. And then the actual people doing the lists. So you're right, incentivization, money comes into it, when you're doing this comes into it. So we had to sort of overcome all of those sort of factors. This year we'll have done our 50th hit list later on this year. So we've done this 50 times now, and they've got better and stronger as we've gone on.
Imran, this week we've seen a report from the GNC about just how endemic and almost structural within the NHS now that burnout seems to be. It's just the experience of so many doctors. And I wonder, what that sort of morale is like with the hit list.
I would say it's a very positive morale, because I think one of the problems and one of the challenges and the reasons for burnout is because it's so challenging to do your job, to run a normal list. It's almost a battle to get things done. Whereas on a hit list, it's the opposite. We've spent so much time planning and preparing. So when the list runs, it runs so efficiently and so well that actually you have the opposite effect, where you're on a high. And I was saying this earlier, it's such a sense of achievement amongst everybody when you run a hit list, because you've done such a good job and you've done what you want to do, which is operate as a surgeon or anaesthetize as an anaesthetist. Many of our hit lists are done by surgeons who want to do them again. So they've done multiple hit lists because they've seen just how well they run. I wouldn't do a hit list every week for the same surgeon or every month for the same surgeon. I'd maybe do one every 2 months for the same surgeon, because, again, you don't want to overwork them. Same with our nursing staff, same with our anaesthetists. So, we really do factor in well-being in our planning and preparation for hit lists.
In terms of the impact they've had on throughput, on the number of patients you've seen, could you give us a sense of how the scheme has affected that?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved. So when we first started, we started with high volume, low complexity cases, the ones that weren't getting into theatres because they were low priority. But as time has gone on, we've evolved into doing more high complex, low volume cases. So we've moved to arthroplasties, plastics, reconstructions, cochlear implants, robotic cases. So much more complicated cases. So initially we would go by numbers, but actually, if you're doing, like for example, last Saturday we did 35 patients doing over 50 varicose vein procedures, because some patients had bilaterals, and so there are big numbers. But we also have done 10 robotic prostatectomies. Now 10 is a lot less in terms of numbers, but relatively you would only do maybe 3 in a day, and we did 10 in one day and finished at 5 o'clock. So relative to what you would normally do, we do many, we do at least double, often more cases. Now, the impact has been quite remarkable. Hasn't been sustained because we haven't done the same hit lists over and over again. Because yes, we've done 35 patients, but after a few weeks, then that waiting list has increased again, and that impact is diluted. If we were able to do it once a month, then we could keep doing 35 patients, and that way we would then whittle down the waiting list. So you need to, if you want to have a more sustained impact, you need to be doing them regularly across the same area.
And if you're interested in reading more on that and the plans to roll this out further, Gareth's article is available on bmj.com. That's it for this week. The articles we've been talking about are linked in the podcast notes. We'll be back next time with more Olympics coverage and a look at the state of general practice in the NHS. You'll find that wherever you listen to podcasts. Until then, thanks for listening.